Stop fooling yourself about what his words truly mean and understand something that could save you from years of confusion, heartbreak, and emotional exhaustion. What you're about to hear may completely change the way you look at certain conversations forever. It may even break apart every excuse you've been making for behavior that has slowly damaged your confidence and blurred your understanding of what real love actually looks like. After spending many years studying relationship patterns and listening to countless personal stories from women in different countries and backgrounds, one truth keeps showing up again and again. There are four specific kinds of phrases that don't simply reveal a man's feelings. They often reveal the direction he has already chosen. They quietly expose whether he plans to invest in you or simply keep you close while searching for someone else. These aren't always obvious warning signs. They are often wrapped in words that sound honest, thoughtful, or even caring. That is exactly why they are so easy to believe. The moment these words leave his mouth, you need to pay attention. You are not always dealing with someone who is confused or still figuring life out. Sometimes you are dealing with someone who has already decided not to give you his full commitment, but still wants the comfort of your attention, your support, your affection, and your presence while keeping his options open. Stay with me until the end, because the fourth phrase is the most dangerous of all. It sounds comforting, it sounds mature. Many people even call it wise relationship advice. Yet it quietly keeps countless women waiting for a future that never arrives. Before we uncover these four phrases that deserve your full attention, there is something even more important you need to understand first. This single idea has the power to completely change how you view every relationship from this moment forward. Most people grow up believing that love means endless patience, endless understanding, and constantly giving someone another chance instead of honestly accepting who they are today. We are often taught that if we care deeply enough, stay loyal long enough, and keep proving our value, eventually the other person will recognize what they have and finally choose us. That belief sounds hopeful, but it can also become a trap. So keep watching, because what comes next may completely change the way you hear these words forever. This way of thinking becomes so deeply rooted that many people lose the ability to separate someone who is genuinely growing from someone who simply knows the right things to say. There is a huge difference between real effort and carefully chosen words. One creates trust, the other creates confusion. Yet when emotions are involved, that difference becomes harder to notice. Many people begin explaining away obvious warning signs because they are focused on potential instead of reality. They tell themselves that change is coming, that the timing is wrong, or that love requires waiting just a little longer. Meanwhile, months quietly become years. Confidence slowly disappears. Self-respect begins to fade without anyone realizing it. Healthy standards are replaced with endless exceptions. Instead of asking whether someone is truly showing up consistently, people start celebrating tiny moments of attention as proof that everything is improving. But genuine love does not depend on endless guessing. It does not leave you constantly decoding messages, questioning your worth, or wondering where you stand. A healthy relationship brings increasing clarity, not increasing confusion. It creates security instead of emotional instability. The uncomfortable truth is that some people understand exactly how powerful uncertainty can be. As long as you remain hopeful, you remain available. As long as you keep believing tomorrow will be different, you continue investing today. That emotional investment becomes harder to walk away from with every passing week. Watch carefully, because the next ideas explain why these simple phrases can quietly keep someone emotionally stuck without them even realizing it. These phrases are rarely random mistakes or simple communication problems. In many situations, they work like quiet tests. They reveal how much disappointment you are willing to accept and how often you will ignore your own needs just to make life easier for someone else. People who rely on these words often know exactly how powerful they can be. They have seen that when they stay vague, many people begin lowering their expectations while giving even more of themselves. They count on you to explain away their behavior instead of seeing the pattern clearly. That is why what you're hearing today is much more than relationship advice. It is about protecting your future before emotional confusion becomes emotional damage. The person you choose to build your life with influences far more than your love story. They affect your peace of mind, your confidence, your friendships, your family, your career, your finances, your physical health, and the way you see your own value every single day. Choosing someone who never truly intends to meet you halfway can slowly drain your energy until your own dreams begin fading into the background. You spend years trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You keep pouring love into a situation that was never built to return it. Keep watching, because the first phrase sounds harmless at first, but once you understand what may be hiding underneath it, you will never hear it the same way again. The first phrase that should immediately make you stop and think is when someone responds to a conversation about commitment, exclusivity, or taking the relationship forward by saying, "Just give me time." At first, those words can sound calm, mature, and completely reasonable. That is exactly why they work so well. They create the feeling that asking for clarity is somehow unfair. But in many situations, those words are not really about needing a little more time. They become a way of asking you to pause your expectations while nothing actually changes. Instead of moving the relationship forward together, one person keeps all the freedom while the other keeps all the hope. Little by little, you are encouraged to stop asking questions, stop expressing your needs, and stop expecting the consistency that naturally comes with genuine commitment. The conversation quietly shifts until you begin wondering whether your expectations are the real problem. Suddenly, wanting a clear future feels like asking for too much. Wanting honesty feels impatient. Wanting security feels unreasonable. Watch closely, because this is where many people start doubting themselves instead of paying attention to what is really happening. Think about what may actually be happening beneath those words. Sometimes the person has already decided they are unsure, yet they also do not want to lose the emotional support, attention, companionship, affection, or confidence boost they receive from having you close. So they ask for more time without offering a clear direction. They receive many of the benefits of commitment while avoiding the responsibility that commitment requires. Over time, this can slowly change the way you see yourself. You begin believing that asking where the relationship is going makes you difficult. You convince yourself that wanting progress makes you needy. You start apologizing for normal emotional needs that should never require an apology. Eventually, you create a version of yourself that asks for less, expects less, and accepts less, simply to avoid making the other person uncomfortable. That version may seem peaceful on the outside, but inside it becomes exhausting. It feels like living behind a mask every day, and that is why this pattern is so dangerous. It teaches you to shrink instead of grow. What these words often create is a relationship where one person receives nearly everything while giving very little certainty in return. You are expected to stay loyal without knowing where you truly stand. You are expected to invest emotionally while the other person remains comfortably undecided. You give patience, understanding, affection, and consistency while waiting for promises that never seem to become actions. The hardest part is not always the waiting itself. It is the emotional roller coaster that comes with it. One day you feel hopeful because they seem closer than ever. The next day you feel anxious because nothing has actually changed. That cycle repeats over and over until uncertainty begins feeling normal. Weeks become months, months quietly become years. Many people stay because they believe the breakthrough is just around the corner, even though every conversation ends with another request to wait a little longer. If this sounds familiar, stay with me, because the next phrase is even more convincing, and it has trapped countless people in relationships that never moved forward despite all the promises they were given. You end up living in a constant cycle of hope mixed with anxiety. Every morning you wonder if today will finally be different. Maybe today he will be ready. Maybe today he will choose you without hesitation. Maybe today he will finally give the clarity you've been waiting for. So you begin searching for tiny signs, reading into every message, every smile, every compliment, every promise that sounds slightly more serious than the last. At the same time, you become careful with everything you say. You avoid asking difficult questions because you don't want to seem demanding. You hide your disappointment because you fear pushing him away. You start walking on emotional eggshells, not because that's who you are, but because you're trying to protect a relationship that never feels secure. Slowly, your own needs disappear into the background while all your attention goes toward protecting his comfort and keeping him interested. That isn't the peace that healthy love creates. It is emotional confusion that slowly drains your confidence without you even noticing. The longer this pattern continues, the easier it becomes to forget what genuine appreciation actually feels like. Remember this, because the next phrase is even more convincing, and many people mistake it for honesty when it often hides something completely different. The second phrase that should immediately make you pause is when someone says, "I'm just being honest with you," right after saying something that is unnecessarily hurtful, dismissive, or lacking basic kindness. At first, those words sound responsible. They make it seem like the speaker deserves credit simply for telling the truth. But honesty should never become permission to ignore another person's feelings. In many situations, this phrase becomes a shield that protects someone from taking responsibility for the pain they cause. Instead of asking whether their words were thoughtful or respectful, they shift the focus onto your reaction. Suddenly, if you feel hurt, the conversation becomes about your sensitivity instead of their behavior. They quietly suggest that the problem is not what they said, but your inability to handle honesty. That shift is powerful because it makes you question yourself instead of examining how you were treated. Stay with me here, because this small change in perspective has kept countless people trapped in painful situations for far longer than they ever expected. Real honesty and real kindness can exist together. Someone can tell the truth without humiliating you. They can communicate difficult things while still protecting your dignity. People who truly value a relationship understand that how they speak matters just as much as the message itself. They know honesty is not only about facts, it is also about respect, timing, empathy, and care. But when someone repeatedly hides behind the words, "I'm just being honest," after hurting you, they may be showing that expressing themselves matters more to them than protecting the relationship. Over time, this changes the way you think about yourself. You begin believing that feeling hurt means you are emotionally weak. You convince yourself that asking for kindness is unrealistic. You stop reacting to words that deeply affect you because you've accepted the idea that your pain is something you should simply manage on your own. Little by little, you become disconnected from your own instincts, yet your emotions exist for a reason. They are signals. They help you recognize when something feels unsafe, disrespectful, or unhealthy. Ignore those signals long enough, and you lose one of the most important ways your mind protects your heart. The third phrase that should immediately make you pay close attention is, "You knew what this was," especially after you express disappointment about how you're being treated or ask where the relationship is going. This statement often shifts the entire responsibility onto you. Instead of discussing the present situation honestly, the other person points back to the beginning and acts as if nothing should ever change. The message becomes simple. Since expectations were low at the start, you supposedly have no right to hope for growth, consistency, or deeper commitment later. That way of thinking ignores how real relationships naturally develop over time. People become closer, feelings deepen, trust grows. It is completely normal for expectations to change as emotional investment increases. Yet this phrase makes you question everything. You begin wondering whether you misunderstood the connection, imagined the closeness, or expected too much from someone who acted like a committed partner in every way except with words. Little by little, your confidence in your own memory begins to fade, while their version of events becomes the only version that seems acceptable. And that is why this phrase can be so damaging. It slowly teaches you to doubt your own reality instead of trusting what you have clearly experienced. Keep watching, because the next phrase is often the hardest one to recognize, and it has convinced countless people to stay in situations that quietly stole years of their lives. This kind of thinking can become the starting point of a deeply unhealthy relationship. It reveals something important about the other person's mindset. Instead of seeing your growing emotional investment as something valuable to protect, They may begin treating it like something they can use for their own advantage. Rather than appreciating your trust, your openness, and the way you slowly let them into your life, they may see those things as proof that they no longer have to earn your commitment. As your feelings grow stronger, instead of matching your effort with greater clarity and consistency, they begin acting as if your desire for a deeper connection is somehow unreasonable. They make it sound as though you are changing the agreement, when in reality you are simply responding to a relationship that has naturally become more emotionally intimate. The result is that you start questioning yourself. You wonder if asking for security is asking for too much. You wonder if expecting honesty makes you demanding. But pause for a moment and think about that. Healthy relationships grow. As trust grows, expectations also grow. That is not a flaw. It is one of the most natural parts of human connection. Stay with me, because this next idea explains why so many people stay trapped in situations that quietly become more painful over time. The truth is much simpler than many people realize. When two people spend more time together, become emotionally closer, and build deeper trust, it is completely normal for both of them to want greater clarity about where the relationship is going. Wanting commitment after sharing your time, your emotions, your loyalty, and your vulnerability is not asking for something unreasonable. It is a normal human response to increasing closeness. Yet some people depend on making you believe that these natural needs are somehow excessive. They quietly encourage you to ignore your own instincts while continuing to invest more of yourself. Over time, the relationship becomes frozen in the same uncertain place where it began, even though everything else has changed. You give more, you care more, you sacrifice more, you become more emotionally attached, but you are expected to keep accepting the same limited level of commitment because you are reminded that this is how it started. That imbalance slowly becomes exhausting. One person keeps receiving nearly everything while offering very little certainty in return. If this pattern sounds familiar, keep watching, because the final phrase is often the hardest one to recognize, even though it causes some of the deepest emotional wounds. The fourth phrase sounds thoughtful at first. It even sounds caring. Someone says, "I don't want to hurt you," or "I don't want to lead you on," and then continues behaving in ways that create exactly the pain they just mentioned. Those words can feel comforting because they create the impression that the person is honest and emotionally aware. But words alone are never enough. Actions always reveal the real story. When someone knows their behavior is likely to cause pain and still chooses to continue without making meaningful changes, the warning does not erase the outcome. Instead, it can become a way of protecting themselves from responsibility later. It quietly shifts the focus away from their choices and onto yours. If you stay, you may begin feeling that any future disappointment is somehow your fault because they warned you in advance. That is why this phrase can be so confusing. It sounds compassionate while sometimes creating permission for behavior that remains deeply unfair. Real care is not only expressed through warnings, it is shown through decisions that reduce unnecessary pain, protect trust, and respect the emotional well-being of the other person. What makes this pattern especially difficult is that it often challenges your desire to appear strong, mature, and understanding. You may begin telling yourself that you should be able to handle uncertainty without asking for reassurance. You convince yourself that needing commitment means you are less independent or less emotionally secure. Slowly, you start competing against your own needs instead of listening to them. You try to become the person who never asks difficult questions, never requests clarity, and never expects consistency. But healthy relationships do not require you to disconnect from your own emotional needs in order to keep someone close. They make space for honest conversations, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Someone who truly wants to protect your heart does not simply announce that pain may happen and continue the same behavior anyway. They actively choose actions that create safety instead of confusion. As you reflect on these four phrases, you may feel surprised, relieved, or even recognize moments from your own past. Maybe you are finally finding words for experiences that never fully made sense before. If that's happening, stay with me until the very end, because understanding these patterns is only the first step. The next step is learning how to recognize relationships that bring peace instead of constant uncertainty, and that lesson may change the way you choose love forever. Right now, you may be replaying old conversations in your mind. Maybe you're looking at a current relationship with completely different eyes. Maybe memories from years ago suddenly make sense in a way they never did before. That moment of clarity can feel uncomfortable, even painful, but it is often the first step toward making healthier choices. This isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone or believing that love is impossible. It isn't about expecting the worst from every person you meet. The purpose is much simpler than that. It is about learning to recognize patterns before they become painful habits. It is about understanding the difference between someone who brings peace into your life and someone who keeps you trapped in constant uncertainty. Keep watching, because this next part is one of the most important ideas in the entire conversation. There are people who never rely on confusion to keep a relationship alive. They don't play emotional games to test your loyalty. They don't leave you wondering where you stand every week. Instead, they understand that trust grows through honesty, consistency, and actions that match their words. They know that real connection becomes stronger when both people feel emotionally safe, respected, and valued. There are people who naturally protect the trust you place in them instead of using it for their own benefit. They see your openness as something precious rather than something to take advantage of. When difficult conversations happen, they choose kindness without avoiding the truth. They understand that honesty and compassion can exist together. They do not keep you trapped in endless uncertainty because they know that healthy relationships grow through clarity, not confusion. They are willing to communicate openly, make consistent efforts, and show through their actions that you matter. Most importantly, they do not see commitment as losing freedom. They see it as a meaningful decision built on respect and shared values. People like this absolutely exist, but it becomes much harder to recognize them when you are spending all your energy explaining away unhealthy behavior from someone else. Every excuse you make for repeated disappointment slowly lowers your expectations. Every time you convince yourself that disrespect is normal, you become less able to recognize genuine care when it finally appears. Stay with me, because the next lesson may help you avoid years of unnecessary heartbreak. Learn to trust those quiet feelings that appear before your mind begins creating excuses. If something feels uncomfortable during the first weeks of getting to know someone, don't ignore it just because you hope things will improve later. If you constantly find yourself explaining away words that made you uneasy or convincing yourself that they probably meant something different, pause and pay attention. If you notice yourself changing your personality, hiding your opinions, avoiding important conversations, or lowering your standards simply to make another person more comfortable, that is valuable information. Those changes are not random. They often reveal that the relationship is asking you to become less of yourself instead of encouraging you to become more. Remember this: you are not responsible for fixing people who repeatedly hurt you. You are not responsible for teaching someone how to value you. And you are not required to remain in situations that slowly make you feel smaller simply because another person is unwilling to grow. Your responsibility is to remain honest with yourself, respect your own needs, trust what your instincts are telling you, and build a life where you feel safe being completely authentic. Never forget this final thought: the kind of love you hope to experience cannot fully reach you while you are settling for relationships that constantly ask you to ignore your own worth. Healthy love does not require you to become quieter, smaller, or easier to keep around. It meets the real version of you, not the version that survives by accepting less than you truly need. The next time you hear one of these familiar phrases, remember everything we have talked about today. Remember that you never have to convince someone to recognize your value. Every day spent defending behavior that leaves you confused is another day taken away from building the future you truly deserve. Every sleepless night wondering where you stand slowly teaches your mind that uncertainty is normal, even though healthy relationships rarely feel that way. Real love brings peace more often than confusion. Real commitment creates confidence instead of constant guessing. And genuine care never makes you feel guilty for having ordinary human needs. Perhaps the hardest part of walking away is not losing the person standing in front of you. It is letting go of the future you imagined, the promises you hoped would become real, and the version of them that existed only inside your expectations. That realization can hurt, but it also creates space for something far healthier. And what comes after that decision may become the beginning of the strongest chapter of your life.